Welcome to Fan View, the show where we talk about all sorts of things fan-related from a fan's perspective. My name is Sarah Cooper, and my co-host this evening is Aaron. Aaron, how are you tonight?
Good, Sarah. How are you? Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very well. I'm having a nice birthday, and thought I'd join all you lovely people for this evening, and hopefully have a nice discussion about animation. So tonight's topic is animation. Just jumping straight into it, we're discussing the death of cell shaded or traditional animation. Are you excited to discuss this topic, Aaron?
I am. It's not a topic that I really talk about a lot, but I love animation. I always have and see just about every animated movie that comes out. So it's a bit different from what we usually talk about, but it'll still be a really interesting topic.
Yeah, no, I think it will be hopefully a good one. Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, and thank you, William. No, I hope the entire thread isn't just people wishing me happy birthday. As much as I'd enjoy that, I don't know how exciting that is for the rest of you. So, so jumping straight into it, we're going to just start with 2D versus 3D animation. If we could bring up the slides. Whoop, there we go. So going straight into it, here is an example of 2D versus 3D and some examples throughout, these are mostly Disney. There's one or two Nintendo related ones. But yeah, so things where they've made the jump, essentially. The animation has made the jump from 2D to 3D. Aaron, what are your thoughts on the jump from 2D to 3D?
It's interesting because when you look at stuff that was originally designed in 3D, like the Frozen one there, I do think the 3D one is really great. But when you look at the stuff that was originally designed in 2D and has made the jump, like the one underneath, where someone has done the 3D version of Belle from Beauty and the Beast, the original version is, in my opinion, heaps better.
Hmm. No, it's actually very interesting. Fun fact, Frozen originally was meant to be a traditionally animated film. It was called The Snow Queen, and it was in development hell for a long time before they decided, essentially the movie Tangled came out, and it came out after Princess and the Frog, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but Princess and the Frog essentially did poorer than Tangled in the box office, and as a result, Disney basically shut down their animation studio, their traditional cats. Sorry, cats. They essentially shut down their traditional animation studio and made the move to fully 3D animated. And as a result, the Frozen we got was very different to the original film that was in production. But as we all know, that went very well for Disney, and they made a lot of money. So it's understandable they're not really looking at going back at the moment.
I am happy that the last one they did manage to do the Princess and the Frog, because if that hadn't have happened, the last Disney cell animation would have been Home on the Range, which would have not been the best one to go out on.
No, that would have been a very depressing end to a wonderful saga. But look, unfortunately, for many reasons, Princess and the Frog wasn't a commercial or critical success. It was viewed as very popular by fans of traditional animation, and it's a gorgeous film. But it's a, hang on, let me see if I can bring the information. Let's see if I can bring the slide up. Hang on, there we go. Can we bring that one up, please? There we go, Princess and the Frog. So yeah, look, A Princess and the Frog was a very ambitious project for Disney. So it basically, they did traditional animation with digital techniques as well, and it was traditionally painted in ways that Disney used to be famous for. But if you haven't watched the movie, I absolutely would recommend it just for the animation alone, because it is an absolute feast for the eyes. The artistry is above and beyond anything Disney had ever put out, and it is just so unfortunate that because it wasn't super popular, it just has resulted in the Disney we have today.
It's interesting because Princess and the Frog isn't one I remember being particularly outstanding. I don't remember much about it at all. I might have to watch it again after this just to see. Did they go from doing cell animation to CGI aided cell animation as a way to cut the costs down?
So the transition from traditional animation to CG animation was very gradual, and it actually started, I believe, now I might be wrong, it's either with Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast, and I have a feeling it's Beauty and the Beast. So, hang on, let me get that one up. We're a bit of a mess today, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I've been out all day, so I haven't had as much time to prepare as usual. Is that it? Nope, not that. Oh, dearie me, oh my. I'm so sorry.
The Beauty and the Beast, while you're looking for it, I think it was just the ballroom scene and a couple of backgrounds that they started doing CG animation to give it more depth, not so much the main characters.
So you'd think that, but it actually was a step further than that. So they actually, it was one of the first films where they actually Xeroxed the entire film and they digitized the lines. So with Apple, which what was to become Pixar, basically they went through and they scanned everything with a Xerox, put it in the computer, and then digitally changed the lines from black and just black ink lines into whatever color they wanted them to be. So essentially, they streamlined the process, and I believe there was some digital coloring as well done on Beauty and the Beast, and it really was the first time that had ever been done. Now, please, if anyone knows better, please tell me, because I am 90% sure it was Beauty and the Beast, but I may be talking about The Little Mermaid. It was one of those films around that time in the golden age of Disney.
When you watch Beauty and the Beast, especially when it first came out and you see that scene and it it goes into wide angles for animation and stuff you hadn't seen in animation before. And I do remember at the time thinking, how did they do that? Because you could theoretically do it with, I guess, storyboarding and a lot of working it out mathematically and drawing up all the stuff on paper. But doing it on computer would have made it a whole heap easier to do.
If we want to bring it up again, we can actually see specifically what Aaron's talking about. So essentially for the ballroom, they built the set digitally, which allowed them to do wide panning shots around the room, which until then they hadn't really, it was something that was very, very difficult to visualize and do in animation. But as a result of having that 3D model, so that physical space that they could put the characters in, it meant they could zoom the camera around the room in the same way essentially you would if you built a physical set and then just rotoscoped. But rather than having to rotoscope it, they had it in the computer. So then they were importing the animation on top of that, and it did result in that absolutely gorgeous scene, which is one of the reasons that Beauty and the Beast is so highly regarded and won so many awards.
Now, it's interesting with Beauty and the Beast and a lot of the movies that started using CGI as an aid to the animation, that I do think a lot of the times the sequences that they do use the CGI are the standout sequences in the movie. But I prefer cell animation to CGI. So I like it better when it's used as an enhancement to a traditional movie rather than making the jump to an entire CGI movie. I think it's charming in Beauty and the Beast that they didn't decide to do CGI cups and plates and stuff where they probably could have, and they could have started doing that. Do you have a preference between CGI and cell animation?
I personally prefer cell animation. I love the artistry of it. Kirsty's just mentioned that I have almost quoted the interview with the CG animator in full. Yeah, I'm a big nerd for this stuff. I grew up with Disney movies. I absolutely love them. I was born at the absolute optimal time to be a Disney nerd. Grew up with the golden age of Disney, which very, very, very privileged to have been able to experience that. And home video also made it a wonderful time.
It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I grew up, I'm older than you, where I was probably at that age we mentioned earlier where people going, oh, Disney is for kids. But I went through the time when technology started to amp up. So you got to the end of traditional animation and you start getting these ones that have more cinematic application for computers. So it kept me interested in the original animation more than if we had just got straight cell animation through that era.
I think that's also the other interesting thing about, when I grew up, because I did see firsthand that, Beauty and the Beast, that it literally came out the year I was born. So I'm telling you all, hello, today is my 31st birthday, if you've not done the maths. But yeah, that's basically CG was just a baby when I was born, and as a result of that, I do remember it slowly being incorporated more and more. And I remember seeing Toy Story when it first came out, and everyone raving about Toy Story, which it's one of Toy Story is actually a very fascinating one, because when you go back and you watch Toy Story now, it is a little bit dated, but
Yeah.
the thing is, the story is so good. After the first 5 minutes or so, you ignore the fact that it looks like it was, made in a PlayStation 1, and suddenly you're just transported into the world of it, and you accept it. You accept it. And it really does point out that it doesn't matter what the visual medium is. If the story is good, you will be compelled to continue watching it.
And I think that's what you see through all animation, no matter how good the animation is, be it 3D, 2D, CGI. A couple of minutes into it, you're lost to the story. And if you don't have a good story, it doesn't matter how great the animation is, it's not going to hold up. It's not going to be a movie that has legs beyond its original run.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Look, another example of that early CG integration into 2D was The Lion King. If we could bring that slide up, that would be excellent. So yeah, we've got this gorgeous scene, which was the hyenas in the gorge. Essentially, it's a very traumatic scene. I grew up as someone who grew up watching it, and I'm sure as many adults who grew up watching it, well, not grew up, but watched it as an adult, I'm sure it was still traumatic for you. Bambi's mum, the same thing. You still cry. But yes, this very horrible scene. But what they did with that one was they scanned the wildebeest, was it, Aaron? You were telling me earlier. Tell me, what did they do?
What they did, again, this is a really amazing example of using computer-aided graphics to aid the animation process. So they drew the original wildebeests, and they cell animated a couple of them, and then they scanned them into the computer and mapped them over digital versions of them. And then they let the computer run random run-throughs, so it would appear how wildebeests ran through the gorge in real life. And so they could never have done that hand animated. But the thing that happened by them scanning it in and painting them and then putting that in the computer, it looks like cell animation, even though it was computer generated animation. And then the other things they did in this, which I didn't know before, just researching it the last couple of days, the smoke and dust in it was all CG added as well, but they were mindful in making it look like it was animated. So at the time, they weren't trying to push the boundaries of computer animation. They were using it again as a tool to make the hand-drawn animation the absolute best they could make it look.
And that's very interesting, and it's also amusing because I know that The Lion King has the famous scene where the smoke spells out what was believed to be SEX, which apparently it was actually SFX, and it was the FX department put that in there intentionally. But it absolutely horrified a lot of puritanical people for a little while there.
Yeah, I was shocked by the lack of sex in The Lion King.
Well, no, there is that scene, the "Can you feel the love tonight?" That's surprisingly surprisingly adult scene. When you watch it back as an adult, you're like, whoa, okay, there you go. But moving on, we also have another example of Disney dipping their toe in the CG waters. We have Hercules. So Hercules, here's some storyboards of where it started. So essentially, when they decided to make the Hydra has, if you know the myth of the Hydra and the myth of Heracles, it's not Hercules, it's Heracles if we're going through Greek mythology, because Hercules is Roman. Sorry, just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. But we go through there, and they've got these, it's essentially whenever you cut off one head to replace it. And that's something that would be incredibly difficult to traditionally animate. But instead, they managed to create a digital version of it with these duplicating heads that just more and more come in. And it is one of the most, I think, of the early Disney, it's one of the most obvious uses of CG, because you've suddenly got these complete 3D models in a scene with, a completely cel-shaded Hercules.
This is one of those things where, again, Hercules wasn't the most well-received movie. I thought it was fantastic at the time, but you can understand it was probably pitched where Disney movies are pitched at the whole family. This probably would entertain an adult more than children, and it was another one where the CGI scene was the standout scene. It was a bit scary for kids. I remember at the time a couple of kids being freaked out, and it is one of those things when you look at it, it just couldn't be done with traditional animation. Now, this goes back, you were talking about Xerox machines earlier. This goes back all the way to 101 Dalmatians, where that movie couldn't have been made except for this new revolutionary technology, the photocopier, the Xerox machine. And the animators had told Disney they could not keep track of all the different puppies and all the spots and where they were meant to be. It would send everyone cross-eyed. But because the Xerox machine was invented, they were able to make 101 Dalmatians. And this sort of goes forward to what you were saying with Beauty and the Beast and the Xerox machine. And then it gets to Hercules, where they're now putting the whole frame in the computer and then animating it and trying to make it look like shaded, animated, hand-painted stuff. But you can obviously see with the Hydra that it isn't. So if we're getting movie after movie where the highlight of the movie is the CG scene, we're eventually going to wind up with someone in the production office going, hold on a second, why don't we do a whole movie like this?
And that is absolutely what happened. So, you know, we start with the advent of Pixar, of course. So Pixar comes in and they create Toy Story, a movie that absolutely blows everyone's mind. It revolutionizes animation. Suddenly you've got these toys that they just come to life. They're moving around and they look, at least at the time, they look like real toys. And it completely changed everything. So until then, I don't think they thought that that could be done. In the same way that you've got to remember that the original, when Snow White originally came out, they didn't think you could make a full-length animated Technicolor with sound motion picture, and then they did it. They made a complete movie that has sound, it has color, it has everything, and it completely changed how, you know, movies would be made moving forward. And the same thing happened with Toy Story. What do you remember when Toy Story first came out?
I do. And the interesting thing you were saying about how it has dated a bit. Now, the other thing you've got to remember, we didn't all have massive TVs in 4K. Back when it came out, we saw it at the cinema, and of course it's going to be high definition at the cinema. But we had video on CTR TVs. So they're very forgiving. And you do have this sort of genre of videotape collectors. I guess it's people who prefer that. And things from this era do look better on the original media that they were meant to be played on. So I could see in the future Disney actually going back into their back catalogue of the old earlier Pixar stuff and actually redoing it. Because I'm pretty sure it'd be pretty simple now for them to go through, get the original files, upscale them, put in more detail. I don't know. I'm not an animator. It might be horribly hard to do. But it would be an interesting project if for the anniversary they brought out 4K. Disney used to be, I guess, notorious for not releasing their stuff on home media and keeping the cinema life of something fresh by sort of re-releasing it every 20 years. I could see the people who grew up with Toy Story would go back to the cinema to see a cleaned up original Toy Story with new detail and extra, not changing any of the story, not doing a George Lucas, but just doing a improved print of the original. What do you think about that?
I think that would be brilliant. It's one of those things, though, that it really comes down to if they kept those original files. And honestly, as well, if they have computers that can still, you know, properly play those files, because that's the thing. When you, well, I have a cat that's about to jump down. No. Please don't. Sorry, I don't want a light to fall on me. So it's one of those things that if they don't have those files in the same format and they don't have a computer that can read that, it might be a lot more difficult than you'd think. But a remastered version of that, if they could make that happen, they would just be printing money, honestly.
Well, the other thing, we're talking mainly about Disney. We are looking at all animation, but Disney has, I guess, the best groundwork for looking at how a company has exploited the technology. We haven't got pictures of this, but Disney have come in for criticism of some of their restorations as well. They recently did Cinderella, and I think they actually lost detail and painted over colours and changed it to the point where even people who were not cinemaphiles were going, hey, this isn't as good as my older version of it. So I guess the main thing with restoration is having someone who's sympathetic with the original material working as the team leader to do it.
It's honestly, I'm going to completely jump away from animation for a second. It's the difference between the restoration of Buffy and the restoration of Charmed. So the restoration of Buffy was essentially done by a computer. They used a computer program to do it. They did it for TV. They didn't consult anyone on the original staff. Joss Whedon wasn't consulted. None of the people that had actually worked on Buffy were really consulted. And they made these 4K high def widescreen versions so they could play it on TV and advertise it. And Fox just kind of went, do it, whatever. Whereas Charmed, which was a far less popular show, they were both very popular, but far less critically acclaimed. Let's put it that way. Charmed, the people that worked on that, they did it one season at a time. They released one season at a time. It was manually done. It was done with so much love and so much care. And it is just this gorgeous, beautifully, perfectly, pristinely restored show, as opposed to Buffy, which unfortunately, because of this, they're not going to now do a actual proper restoration of Buffy because they've got the cheaply done one. Why do they need to spend the money to have another one done? But it does unfortunately lead to scenes where, we have a vampire standing in the middle of the day, and they're meant to be, if they're out in the sun, they will die. But for some reason, they're not. So it's essentially the same thing as that. If they do it as a cheap cash grab, which Cinderella essentially was, you end up with a Blu-ray that is lower quality than the VHS, lower quality than all previous DVD releases, and colors change, details are lost, and it just looks sad. Whereas if they actually take the time and do a proper restoration, like, for example, the Lion King restoration that they did and then released in 3D, that is a proper one, and then that is beautiful, that is done with love, done with care, they make more money off it. And yeah, it's just one of those things where if they take the time and put the love in, it will be better. But unfortunately, they don't always do that.
No, that's absolutely true. And like you said, the Buffy is an absolute abomination. But let's move away from Buffy back to animation. We're talking about, I guess, Pixar were the benchmark of good CGI in the early days of it. And of course, when that happens, you're going to get other companies that come along and try and copy this. And often it's such a blatant copy. You get Bugs, Ants, Finding Nemo, Reef, and Shark Movie, and all this stuff like that. And there's a couple of companies that have gone that way. What do you think of this animation that is sort of in the Disney style but not quite Disney, has the Disney stories but hasn't got the Walt Disney seal of approval on them?
Personally, I enjoy some of them. So there's the Don Bluth ones. So movies like Thumbelina and Anastasia, and there's a couple of others.
American Tail. And,
yeah, I think even Fern Gully. I always want to say Fern Gully, but it's Fern Gully. Pretty sure that was also Don Bluth. And those are absolutely made with the same love that they put into a Disney film. They've got the great stories, the great songs. If you go back and look at the cast of Thumbelina, the voice of Thumbelina is the same voice actor that did Ariel. Thumbelina's dad is literally the voice of King Triton from The Little Mermaid. It's basically a Little Mermaid reunion, but it was released by Fox Animation as opposed to Disney. So it's one of those things where we do have those films that some of them are good, but I do also remember when I was young, asking my mum to borrow, say, Beauty and the Beast from the video shop, and her coming back, and she'd borrowed Beauty and the Beast, but it wasn't the Disney Beauty and the Beast. It was the other Beauty and the Beast. And it would be this terrible movie that was very much, they're like, this story is public domain. We can make whatever we want. And you get these terrible films. And they had they had an Aladdin version. They had a Beauty and the Beast. I think they had a Little Mermaid as well, complete with the sad ending. And there were these just terrible, terrible cash grabs. And I think that's the big difference between, you know, movies made with care and movies made to make money. And
Yeah.
I know that technically all movies are made to make money, but ones that are made just to make money, and that's where the problem lies.
Yeah. There are some that set a benchmark themselves, though. I think probably for adult leaning CGI animation, you have Shrek, which is okay to take kids to, but it pushes the envelope a lot further than Disney. And Shrek had a big influence on the animation market when it came out because it made so much money.
Yeah, look, there's what I like to call the Shrek Effect. It really did change a lot about children's media from that time onward. So we did, up until then, we had a lot of movies that were singing, dancing, fun. They were basically a Broadway musical, but animated, and that was what was very popular. But after Shrek, everyone wanted their movies to be a bit funnier. They wanted the adults to enjoy them just as much as the kids did. And as a result, we get some interesting movies like we get The Emperor's New Groove, we get Lilo and Stitch. And things just absolutely shifted away from what was previously considered, you know, the Disney standard. And then they decided, actually, no, we want to chase the Shrek dollars. And honestly, it's a gamble that I'm not sure if it quite paid off. What do you think of that?
I think it's really interesting because with cell animation, you're never going to get a company that can catch up with Disney. As you've said, there's been a couple of passion projects where you have someone in charge who does attain that same level of sort of excellence, but it isn't consistent for that company. It's just because they've got the lead artist that does it. With CGI, it kind of puts everyone at the same playing field artistically, because a lot of this is specially written, but now easily available programs that any animator can use. So you've got to be looking more at the stories, the scripts, the voice acting and things like that. And it is a case-by-case thing. You've got companies like DreamWorks that obviously, as you were saying, go for that more adult market. And they go, who can we get to voice them? A comedian, let's get Eddie Murphy or Jack Black or someone like that, because they can get away with saying something like, you know, a little bit on the edge that kids won't get, but parents will love kind of thing. So I do think it is almost a genre in itself. And there is a lot of movies that fall into this sort of area. And some of them are amazingly good and stand up really well and will be rewatched and funny for ages. And then other ones you go and see and you get a couple of laughs out, but they don't entertain and the story's not there, and they sort of fade away to obscurity almost straight away.
Yeah, it's really the difference between Shrek and A Shark's Tale, for instance.
Or
We're going
Shrek,
to bring up.
or Shrek and Shrek 4.
I haven't seen Shrek 4. I gave up after Shrek 3. I've heard that Shrek 4 is better than Shrek 3, though, so maybe I should go give it a go. Let's bring up the slideshow again. So this is a selection of DreamWorks movies. And if you actually remember, DreamWorks started with, what was it? What's it called again? Part of my brain is saying Prince of Persia, and that's absolutely not what it is. It was the religious film. It is the story of Moses.
Prince of Egypt.
Prince of Egypt, that's the one. And yeah, that was a very much a Disney adjacent film, but very religious. So we've got William saying, I watch a lot of comic book artists on YouTube. Most only draw digitally. However, a few still draw by hand, but for special projects. And look, William, the thing about that is, with digital technology being what it is now, you can actually very successfully create the illusion that you are drawing traditionally, even if you are drawing digitally. So I do understand why people are shifting away from traditional medium. It's a lot harder to press undo in real life. And Sully has said the only thing DC really do well are the animated movies. Most look like they're animated in the traditional style, but done on the computer. And that is actually something you're seeing more and more of. We are seeing this move to traditional animation, but done in computers. And the biggest space we're actually seeing that in a lot of ways is the gaming space, which we will get to in just a little bit. But yeah, so going back to the idea of DreamWorks. So DreamWorks, they've essentially started with doing, you know, their own version of Disney. And you've also got to keep in mind, most DreamWorks animators were directly people from Disney who essentially had a bad experience with Disney and then had left to create their own company, which is something a little bit fun.
Being a disgruntled worker from Disney, surely you jest.
No, there's none of those. That's not possible. So essentially, we've had a few movies that are, middling success. People have just kind of gone and seen them and thought that, oh, is this Disney? I don't know. And then we get Shrek. And with Shrek, again, it's just like Toy Story. Everything changes, the goalposts shift, and suddenly we've got these movies that are just as much for adults as they are for kids. And really, it's just everything that's come after that is honestly, in many ways, a response to Shrek. So we've got this sudden push to have more male movies, because a lot of those early Disney movies were considered girls' movies because, they had princesses in them. So suddenly we've got things like Treasure Planet coming out. We've got, what was it? Atlantis, The Lost Empire. And we've got all these movies that they're attempting to get the same sort of thing, but they're not quite getting there.
Sinbad, El Dorado, all these ones we all forget.
Yeah. And look, it's just one of those things where I feel very sorry for Disney in this way, because they've clearly lost a lot of talent who have then moved over to DreamWorks, and it's very hard once you've got that competition. You no longer have your monopoly, so how are you going to make people come see your movies? So I do understand them slowly shifting away from the traditional Disney format and moving into these non-musical, more traditional. I don't even know what we'd call them, just animated movies without sound, without music, I guess.
It is interesting with Disney because they do go through eras where they find a really good formula that works for them, and they mine that for about 5 movies, and usually the first one is the second most popular. Then the second one they like, say you start with The Little Mermaid, and then you get Beauty and the Beast, which is a massive hit, and The Lion King, that's a massive hit. But they keep the same formula, and even though the movies are good, you get Hercules, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and it's almost like the enthusiasm with the studio and the audience wears out, and then you get the CGI stuff, and the same thing happens again, where you have a few big hits and then it wears off. I've got to say, Pixar, though, do have a better hit rate than most of the eras. I mean, the end of what I guess a lot of people call the classic era with no CGI was the Black Cauldron, which is one of the worst received Disney movies ever. It's a beautiful movie, not everyone's favorite though. And this happens with a lot of other studios as well, who sort of fall into that trap of, when they find what works, not being radical enough to change it and keep the audience interested.
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things, they need to continue to innovate, but it's hard to innovate and also chase the trends. So yeah. I think that's the issue we often see, is them not trusting the vision. And it really relates back to the DC episode we had a couple of weeks back. When you don't trust the vision of your creatives, you end up sort of ruining the whole thing.
I guess it is a hard one too, because Sully brought it up. We're not really looking at tonight, but one of the better runs of animation was the Batman animated TV series. And that was fantastic because it was dark and black and told in an adult way for kids that adults could enjoy. Brought back classic characters, gave them backstories. There was development. And then after a couple of years, they redesigned everything. And everyone was like, whoa, why does Catwoman look like that? And I guess if you do try and change it too much, you can go in the other direction and alienate the already fan base that you've built up through years and years of producing good material.
It's also that thing that, they always say British TV and British comedies, well, specifically British comedies, they do it best because they know when to quit. They know when to stop. They know, we have 5 episodes a season. We have 2 seasons. That's our entire show. Yeah. And then you compare that to the American model of TV, where you get, 30 episodes a season, and it just keeps going forever. Look at The Simpsons, for instance. And it's really that difference in knowing when to quit. And yeah, I think that's a lot of what it is.
Imagine if the Simpsons had ended on series 10, where just about every episode had something hilariously funny. This is another one of those things where if you don't change the formula or you change it too much, it just doesn't work. Where if you pick anyone's top 10 episodes of The Simpsons, they were in the first 10 years. There is not a single episode from the next 20 years that anyone says gets close to the hilarity of the first 10 years, which, you would think with 20 years there might be one that stands out, but no.
Yeah, it's one of those things when you keep just chasing the money, but you're not chasing the creativity of it. And
Yeah,
again, that's an example of a lot of the original creative team did leave. They moved on to other projects. And
yeah,
so you've got this team left that feel like they just have to keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And you can't do the same thing forever. If you do the same thing forever, it will eventually just burn out and not be good. So Christy has said, what about changing the animation style between the original and the sequel? And that is something that we occasionally do see. And honestly, I'm not particularly a fan of that. I would prefer things to be consistent. It's the same as, like when you buy a book, you want to buy the next book in the series, you want the cover to be the same.
yeah.
It's very jarring when there's a shift from one to the next, in my opinion.
The only time I think that works, and I guess it's not in sequels, is when you get anthologies like the Animatrix, or more recently the Disney series for Star Wars, or Star Wars Tales, or something like that, where every episode was a different style by a different artist, and they let them use and run with their vision. And it produced some absolutely amazing stuff, and stuff that I would sit there and go, who the hell greenlit this?
So we're moving on to Blue Sky Studios. So Blue Sky Studios, they are the most popular for the Ice Age movies. And yeah, that's honestly most of what I know about Blue Sky is Ice Age. So Aaron, what would you like to tell us about Blue Sky?
Well, this is interesting. I think people know Rio as well, and there was probably the failed Snoopy movie that didn't really find its market. But the interesting thing about this, which I did not know until today, Blue Sky Studios are Disney, and they're sort of the B-grade Disney, where they shunt their projects that weren't their popular A projects, and they're a cheaper project, but sometimes they, have a hit like Ice Age. And as we were saying earlier, you have one hit and then you make 6 movies because there's so many unanswered questions. And each movie seems to have, the law of diminishing returns, where it's half as good as the previous one. But I didn't know that this was set up by Disney as sort of another version. And this all comes back down to how Disney structured originally, where they had Disney Animation, Pixar, which started at Lucasfilm, went independent, got bought by Disney, and then Pixar, I think, now has been dissolved back into Disney, and they're making... so they had all these different companies, and it seems like different people who had different ideas about profitability, artistic integrity, and things like that were all running different aspects of the, I guess, the CGI arm of Disney. And this is interesting because with Blue Sky, Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks, in recent years, it got a lot cheaper to produce CGI 3D animated movies, and it kind of has forced cell animation out of the picture to the point where there isn't much cell animation that hits the cinema anymore, unless it's an independent or something really different from what traditional Disney used to be.
I think a lot of the cell animation we do see these days is also digitally created cell animation. So it's false cell animation, not the traditional style. So
yeah,
that's also the question of is digital cell animation the same as traditional cell animation? But that's a completely different thing that would take too long to get into. There was one thing that I did notice about Blue Sky, though, is the movie Rio. Now, I do actually remember a tidbit about the movie Rio. And this is one which I'm confused. I'm very surprised that this has happened if they were both Disney, because Rio was responsible for the cancellation of a Pixar project. Yeah. There was a movie in progress called Newt. Newt was about a
blue frog. Oh, yeah, blue lizard. Yeah.
Blue newt that was essentially going extinct, and it was them putting the 2 last of these creatures together in captivity and trying to force them to breed. And essentially that's almost the exact same plot of the movie Rio. So apparently a very rare example of a Pixar movie being outright cancelled and not just retooled. The movie Rio resulted in a full cancellation, which very interesting if they're technically the same studio.
I bet if you were working at Blue Sky and you're all under the Disney umbrella, you'd be having a good laugh. Think we're the B-grade ones. We just got like an A-grade project cancelled kind of thing. The other thing that got cancelled, I think they made the entire movie was it Toy Story 3 or Toy Story 2? The original one when the rights went back to Disney, and Disney Animation Studio made the movie with all the original cast, and then Pixar came in and said, ain't good enough, and they cancelled the whole movie. So there's a movie out there.
Yeah.
Is it 3? There's a whole movie that was made and never released because of that's an artistic integrity kind of thing where they come in and say, no, it's not up to our standard, and cancelled the whole movie.
Yeah, look, that's another one that I'd be very interested in seeing. But then I guess that's the difference between, there's the Disney, the Pixar official sequels, and then there's the Disney Pixar sequels, which is why we get things like, I think Aeroplanes was the sequels to the Cars movies, which were they were straight to video and very much a cash grab because nobody liked Cars 2. So essentially,
the same thing happened with a lot. The same thing happened with a lot of the cell animation, because the Lion King had Simba's tribe, and then you have Aladdin that has Pride. That's right. The Return of Jafar, and then a third one where John Williams wouldn't come back. Mork, I've forgotten his name. Robin Williams wouldn't come back as the genie because they wouldn't pay him enough, and then everyone hated the direct-to-video sequel, and then they paid him more, and he came back for the third one, and everyone goes, this is great, even though it's not. And they were animated, I think, in Australia as well. It was the cheap Disney arm of the sequels.
So some were and some weren't. So that's actually an interesting thing. I know somebody who worked in the Disney Australia studio, and they basically, if it looked good, it was made, and it was a direct-to-video sequel, it was made in Australia. If it looked bad, it was made in Asia. And I think it was, I can't remember exactly where in Asia it was. I'm sorry. It was Toon something. The studio was Toon something, and it was a subsidiary of Disney, and they just made quick, cheap movies, and they also, I think, did the TV series. So often they wouldn't look as good, and they would just be churned out very quickly, very fast. They would often have lots of errors because there'd be back and forth issues between, an executive in America would tell them do this, and then there'd be a translation issue. Whereas the ones done in Australia were done with a lot more care. They were higher budget, and often they had a cinematic release. So we got things like the Peter Pan sequel, which that was done in Australia. I don't think the Lion King 2 was done in Australia, but I think the Jungle Book sequels were. Yeah. And I think the Bambi was.
The Bambi one was particularly good. They didn't think that was going to get a cinema release, and then it turned out so well that it did. Talking about the company, I think it's in Korea. I could be wrong, but I think that's where the animation series studios that do sort of the cheap animation from Disney were. When I grew up, I used to see the Mickey Mouse Club, and that would be a mix of live action and then classic Disney shorts from the 30s right through probably to the 60s. Now, when Kale, my son, grew up, they had something called the Mouse Factory, which was CGI linking segments of Mickey Mouse to new stuff that had been filmed or animated in Korea. And boy, is that the death of animation for me, where Kale liked it as maybe a 2 or 3 year old, but it was for Disney, the quality was not there at all.
I grew up with Saturday Disney, which was the that in-between thing. And so we had the Little Mermaid animated series. We had the Winnie the Pooh series, which was very good. What else did we have? The Aladdin animated series, which again, I'm pretty sure was done by that same not so great studio, but the stories were generally pretty good. And a lot of other things like Kim Possible and things like that. So it's the eras of Disney and the eras of the, if we want to call it that way, honestly, the eras of the cash grab. So the difference between just trying to make a movie just to make money and no artistic thought has gone into it, they just want home VHS sales, and then something that they actually want to put in cinemas and they want to, really showcase the work.
I guess the other side of the animation story, particularly with Disney, that we haven't really touched on is whoever is running Disney, if you've got someone in charge of the whole Disney company who is working more for the shareholders and to make money, that's often when the Imagineers and the creators get pushed to the side and the budgets go down and the quality drops. and then they actually make less money, even though they were trying to make more money by making these cuts. And it kind of swings round to, they go back to, well, forget about money and we'll do the Disney quality, and it builds stuff back up again. And it kind of is this vicious circle where when they start making money, they try to get cheap on it, and that undermines the whole popularity of what they're producing, and they start losing money and realize they have to put more into it to keep the standards up. It happens again and again with Disney.
It's very interesting because a lot of the golden age of Disney and the fall of Disney both happened under CEO Michael Eisner. And Eisner, Eisner was famous for, he brought in that age of Disney, some of the greatest Disney movies ever made, and all the ones through the 90s were made under him. But it also saw the advent of the movies where they said, no, we can't have any songs. And honestly, that was the beginning of the end for Disney movies. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons why we since have had the resurgence that we've had, even if it has been CG animated as opposed to traditionally. It has been a result of them going, actually, the songs were good. The songs weren't a problem. It was just the stories, and that's what people want. They want a good story more than anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing, when you have Disney with songs, they can sell the soundtracks, and also the songs act as a good promotion, because if you've got Elton John singing a song that's good enough to be played on the radio, which happens with a few of those Disney movies through the 90s, it's extra promotion for the show, and it gives the movies more credibility than they might have had if they're just some movie for kids.
So if you ever get a chance, I would recommend to everyone watching this, if you're interested in animation, I would recommend looking up the documentary on YouTube called The Sweatbox. The Sweatbox is about the making of The Emperor's New Groove, and the fact that originally that entire movie was meant to have songs written by Sting. That entire movie was meant to be a traditional Disney-style animated film, but at the last minute, it was changed. They wanted more humor. They wanted more funniness. They cut characters. They had, I think Owen Wilson was in the original as a character, and they cut him completely. And, all these things that happened, including there's clips of original dialogue by Eartha Kitt and her singing songs that, again, were completely cut from the final product. And if you want to see a bit of what happened behind the scenes of that golden age of Disney, I would absolutely recommend checking that out, because it's a very interesting time.
The other thing that's worth pointing out is when you cut things from a traditional movie, it's a lot different from cutting and changing an animation, because with an original movie, you can get the cast back, you can do a remount for a couple of weeks and get the new scenes. If you cut an animation, this has been planned for years and years and years, and storyboarded and drawn and then animated. And to cut an animation is actually a big deal. It is one of the reasons it happened with the Black Cauldron. It's one of the reasons Don Bluth left, because they cut like 3 minutes out because they said it was too scary for kids. Now, it is already a scary movie, but the animators had an absolute meltdown over this, because you do not cut animation that's taken, that sequence of 3 minutes might have taken a year and a half to animate or something like that. And that's why you do hear disgruntled workers leaving Disney, because the people who are in charge want one thing and then they change it, and then they can't understand why they can't hit the movie deadline because they haven't given them enough lead-in time.
A very interesting example of that was part of Your World from The Little Mermaid was nearly cut in full. That entire song, that entire sequence was nearly removed because in some test screenings, children were restless. And so as a result of that, they nearly cut the entire thing. But essentially I believe it was, I've temporarily forgotten his name, the songwriter for that was instrumental in bringing Disney back, who unfortunately died of AIDS just after finishing Beauty and the Beast. So essentially he had a meltdown and said, no, if you cut this song, I'm walking. I'm not doing any more projects for you. I'm not going to finish Beauty and the Beast. I'm not going to do any more work on the Aladdin project you want me to do. None of that's happening. And so as a result of that, he was able to keep it in, and thank God he was.
Yeah. So, it's executives don't know. They tried to cut Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz because they thought it was boring and no one wanted to sit through the black and white stuff. So it really does show you they just don't know the audience sometimes.
No, they absolutely don't. Then we've got our moving along, we've got other examples of animation. So we've got a few different things here. We've got A Scanner Darkly with Keanu Reeves. We've got a lot of Studio Ghibli. We have some other Pixar movies, and we have some other examples of basically what happens when they try things and maybe they work and maybe they don't. Aaron, what do you want to tell us about this?
Well, we were looking today mainly at is CG the death of cell animation, and I don't think it is, because I think there's room in the market for every style of animation, and I think there's always going to be people that appreciate the artistry of actual hand-drawn and hand-painted animation. Like Sarah said, a lot of the traditional cell animation now is now done on computer anyway, but we won't go into that. But something as crudely drawn as The Simpsons can be more popular than something that someone pours, years of their life into a sort of independent movie. And you've got different styles from different countries, and they don't just go with trends and what's popular at the time. A lot of the Studio Ghibli stuff has got a lot of tradition to it, and they would never move away from what they're doing because it's the house style. You also have there, as you mentioned, through A Scanner Darkly, which gets to the point where animation almost looks like live action. And we do have some live action movies with CGI characters, which I guess are animated characters in them. I guess the most notorious would be Jar Jar Binks, but then you've got stuff that's right up there with Oscar-worthy performances like Smeagol from Gollum from Lord of the Rings. And that's a whole other area that we haven't looked at, because you've got the technology there now where you can basically scan people's images in. And if you've got, say, the wireframe to do a sequence, you can then have that actor do the whole sequence, but it's technically an animated movie.
No, absolutely. And rotoscoping does have a long history. I know that there's old footage of when they were making Sleeping Beauty. There's footage of a woman they had come in as a dancer, and they couldn't quite work out how to animate her doing a waltz. So they brought in a model, had her waltz, and then they essentially got the film footage, drew over it, and there's your film. Another example of rotoscoping, sorry, just quickly, is there was a movie that came out a couple of years ago called Loving Vincent, I believe it was called. And that one was, every single frame of that movie was painted by a different artist, and it was about the life of Vincent van Gogh, done in the style of Van Gogh.
Yeah, the one I was going to bring up was the original Lord of the Rings, the Ralph Bakshi movie, where I remember being terrified by the ring wraiths, because basically they film them and then they rotoscope them. And for people that don't know, that's actually filming the footage and then tracing and drawing over the footage, so you get very realistic. But they basically did them black, so wherever they were black, looked very human and very accurate, but with red eyes. And so rotoscoping does have its place. It isn't really used as much now, and I guess that's because CG has almost taken away the necessity to do that.
I think it's one of those things, they still use it occasionally, but not in the way they used to. Salia said, Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within. The animation was so good, a few times I forgot it was animated. And I think that's one of the goals of CG animation, and you see it in movies like, a very interesting example of that was The Polar Express, which was a very, if you've not heard of the term, the uncanny valley, it's basically a term for when humans perceive something as too close to reality, but also not quite real enough. So when there's essentially a graph of reality versus animated style, and when it gets to a certain point, it goes from people liking it to people hate it, because at that point they perceive that it is creepy and it's like an animated corpse, because there's something behind the eyes that isn't right. And The Polar Express was this beautiful, absolutely masterfully animated film, but unfortunately it was so realistic that it put people off and made people feel ill to watch it. So as a result of that, then we've got the future Disney animation absolutely taking a giant step back and making it much more cartoony as a result.
Like She-Hulk.
She-Hulk, yeah. Yes. Anytime you look at something and you think that looks kind of good, but it also looks like it was done in a PS2, that's probably the uncanny valley. So the question then becomes, what is the future of animation? What's coming next? Aaron, what do you think?
Well, like I said, I think there is the room for all styles of animation. I do think the two that will be the dominant ones are CGI 3D animated movies, and I think 90% of the animation from here on in will be that. But the 10% of stuff that gets greenlit that is still cell animation or other traditional styles of animation, stop motion animation, for example, is another one of those things that we haven't looked at. And there are still movies that come out once in a while done with that style. They will be very special projects. So it might be where we used to get a couple of cell animations a year, and some were good and some were more dodgy. The ones that come out that are in that style and do have that artistic, credibility and I guess visual impact that original animation has will be the special movies that maybe not be as widely loved by everyone, but people who love the art form will definitely go and check them out and be impressed by what comes out in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Very quickly, we had another slide here, which is basically looking at traditional animation, but in a different medium. So we have the game Cuphead, which came out around the mid-2010s. And if you haven't played this game or you haven't heard of it, essentially it's 1930s animation, but it's a video game. And that's another place where, we are seeing traditional animation pop up, is the video game space.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I guess this takes us full circle. The original computer animated images that I remember seeing were the guide from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and some of the original Star Wars movies. And it's interesting to find out most of that wasn't CGI at all. It was actually cell animated, hand cell painted animation made to look like computer graphics because the technology wasn't there to actually produce computer graphics that could be used on the screen. With this game, we've got the other way, where it's come full circle, where you've got computers that are so powerful that they're using original drawings and animation that's based on 30s style Looney Tunes and Warner stuff and Disney stuff to create a playable animated game that looks like you're playing something that was hand-drawn that long ago. So it's a really amazing experience. You're more of a gamer than me. I don't go out and buy a lot of games based on the graphic appearance. That was one I saw and had to download instantly because it looked so beautiful, and that's how much I appreciated the art in that game.
Yeah, look, the art in that game is amazing. It very much, it looks like it's fallen straight out of Popeye or those early animated Disney shorts, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And I really do hope we see a lot more games in that style, because I know that years ago, I remember when one of the Legend of Zelda games came out. I think it was it Wind Waker? Might have been Wind Waker, or it might have been Skyward Sword. I can't remember. I wasn't a Zelda fan yet then, but I remember everyone getting really excited that the art style was cel shaded animation, and that wasn't quite there yet. But now, when we get games like Cuphead, it absolutely is there, and it looks so fantastic. One final example of what the future holds is Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, which is a movie that came out just this year, and it is a movie which has both. It is a perfect blend of traditional animation and 3D animation. And yeah, I think that's really a perfect spot to leave on, because it is where we have ended up, that world where we can have both.
It is. So I think thank you for everyone joining us tonight. Christy's saying, funny enough, I told my film teacher that computers would be making animation in the near future in the 90s. So you're really had your finger on the pulse. Yeah, so it is a good place to end up, because I do think there is room for all types of animation. Obviously in that one though, the cell animation would have been computer generated.
Yeah, but it's still amazing to see both of those side by side. In the same way, I'm sure it was amazing when Mary Poppins came out, seeing the people side by side with the animated creatures. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. Make sure you follow us on whichever platform you're watching us on, or whichever ones you like to use. We are the Sci-Fi Zone, and we will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Well, week, and we'll speak to you soon.
Have a great night. See you guys.
Bye, guys.